we're starting to talk about our creative subconscious and our subconscious, and how do we start to build some of these things, these habits, these attitudes, these beliefs, this self-efficacy. One of the things that we'll start talking about is this model for changing our lives. And so we'll start off talking about pictures. We said earlier that humans communicate best through pictures, even sign language. The whole concept is to pass a set of pictures or images or thoughts from one person to another. And so a picture is worth 1,000 words is where we kind of left off. And so the pictures that we have about ourselves, we might refer to as our self-image. What I find fascinating is when I was a young kid, they did a lot of work with us in elementary school to help us build our self-esteem. And so they gave us packets and worksheets that were designed to help us build our self-esteem. And I found this model. When I found this model, it really gave me a lot of information about what they were trying to do. And we'll see as I grow up if it was effective or not. But the picture that we hold of ourselves is referred to as our self-image. And the way we feel about ourselves, our emotions, is called our self-what? Esteem. Self-esteem is how we feel about ourselves. And our self-esteem dictates our self-efficacy. And all of those impact our comfort zone. What we think we can do or think we can't do determines where we think we can go, where we feel comfortable, and where we can't go. So what are the words that we use? Those are called our self-talk. So oftentimes people talk, in these self-help books and all of these things, they talk about, thinking positive and being positive and fake it till you make it. I don't necessarily subscribe to those kinds of things, but I do understand this principle that if I say certain things about myself, they become a part of my system of beliefs. They become a part of what I know to be true about myself. They become a part of my paradigms. They become a part of my routines. They get established as habits. They influence the power that I have to get things done for myself and for my family. And so words are extremely powerful because they create pictures, they create opportunities for us, they create possibilities for us. And so the words that I use, the self-talk, impacts my self-image, which impacts my self-esteem, which impacts my self-efficacy, which eventually impacts my comfort zone. Now, the interesting thing about comfort zones is that, this is funny, I remember going to a restaurant, and it was one of these new age kind of restaurants that have this funky, funky deco, Euro stuff to it, right? And so I go into the restroom, and I walk past the mirrors and the sinks and stuff. And they have two doors. One is to get into the restroom. The other one is to get into to the urinals and that kind of stuff. So I'm in there, and I come out, and I go to the wash basin, and I'm washing my hands, and I look up, and I see a woman, not me. this was one of those kind of Art Deco-y kinds of places that had a shared facility where people wash their hands. There's no wall between the male and the female. And all of a sudden, when I looked up and saw this woman, I freaked out because I said, I am in the wrong place and I gotta get out of here. All right, that's what I said. I gotta get out of here. The funny thing about your comfort zones, particularly if you build things, your comfort zones don't have a whole lot to do with your abilities. They have more to do with what you think your abilities are, where you think that you can fit in, right? I don't know if you've ever been in the wrong restroom, if you've gone into the wrong apartment building or the wrong house because they all look so similar or the same. But when you go into that wrong place, that place that you're not supposed to be in, what is the first thing that your mind says? It says, get out of here and get back to where you belong. Get back in your comfort zone. Get back to what you know best. Get back to how you used to be, because you know that that's comfortable. And so do I really have the ability to use either of the restrooms? Do I have the ability to use the men's restroom or to use the women's restroom? I have that ability. I can use either one of those. However, that's not what I'm supposed to do because I don't feel comfortable there. Society says I'm not comfortable in the women's restroom. So I say to myself, I got to get out of here and get back to where I belong. And so when we have the self-talk and the self-image and the self-esteem, and it impacts our self-efficacy as far as our comfort zone goes, our comfort zone expands and contracts to our self-talk. All right? It expands and contracts based on our self-talk, on what we think of ourselves or what we say to ourselves about our current situation. Right? So we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. So words create pictures. Self-talk creates our self-image, our self-esteem, impacts our self-efficacy, and ultimately determines where and what we can do based on our comfort zone. All right? So we'll delve deeper into this in just a bit, and I will see you in a couple of minutes. Thanks. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the fabric of oppression. The fabric of oppression. I particularly like talking about this as opposed to just talking about racism or sexism or heterosexism or ageism, because I think those oftentimes are smaller pieces of a broader fabric. I mean, they're patches on a broader fabric called oppression. And I like to talk about oppression because I think that sometimes we get so caught up with particularly racism that we don't look at some of the overarching lessons that can be learned, that can be translated into all sorts of forms of oppression. So I want to take a step back before we talk specifically about each of these categories to talk about the system of oppression as a whole and then how that gets played out. And so in the system of oppression, there is there are a couple of terms that I want to kind of flesh out so we can kind of talk about them. And the first is, what is the group of people who who are known as the dominant group. And what it means to be a part of what is known as the dominant group, it means that you have easy or open access to goods, jobs, services, and money. All right? So the dominant group has easy or open access to goods, jobs, services, and money. Conversely, that means that the target group has what? Yep, they have limited or difficult access to goods, jobs, services, and money. All right? So the dominant group has easy, open access. The target group has limited or difficult access to goods, jobs, services, and money. Why are goods, jobs, services, and money important? Because that's how we have social power. All right? So if we go back to 8th grade science, we understand that power is the ability to do work. That power in and of itself is the ability to do work. So in our society, how are we able to get things done? How are we able to do work? Well, we must have access to money, to goods, to jobs, to services, have access to good health care, have access to good schools, to have access to groups of people, to be connected, to have community, right? Those are all sources of power that allow us to have the ability to do work. And so some folks, some groups have easy or open access to this ability to do work, to this social power. All right? And then there are other folks who have limited access to this social power. All right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that and try and figure out how we can reshape paradigms so that we allow folks to look at themselves and relate to others based on their personal abilities, as opposed to being lumped into groups and all sorts of stuff. So we'll talk about that in just a second. So I've broken up my chart into just a few categories. There could be much more than the ones that I selected. But looking out into society, I tried to find some categories that are pretty universal. So in terms of how we're broken up into groups in our society. And so in terms of race, what group has easy or open access to goods, jobs, services, and money according to race? All right? And typically the response to this is white people, Caucasian, European Americans, but for the sake of this conversation, we'll just say white. We'll come back to race and why I keep putting it in quotations in a little bit. But and down here, the people who have limited or difficult access to goods, jobs, services, and money would be people referred to as others, minority groups, however you want to say that. In terms of gender, are there what group of people have easy or open access to goods, jobs, services, and money based on gender? And that would be males. All right. Target group would be females. In terms of sexual orientation, what group of people has easy or open access to goods, jobs, services, and money? It would be those who appear heterosexual. All right? So those who appear to be heterosexual have easy access to goods, jobs, services, and money. Because if you can be gay, but not look gay or act gay, and still have open access. And as long as you look heterosexual. And then all those who have limited or difficult access to goods, jobs, services, and money would be GLBT, and those who appear to be GLBT. All right? So, sexual orientation, those who appear to be heterosexual have access to goods, jobs, services, and money. Those who appear to be GLBT are denied access to goods, jobs, services, and money, or have limited or difficulties with goods, jobs, services, and money. All right. In terms of religious organizations, what is the dominant religious group in the United States? That would be Christian. And that would include Lutherans, Catholics, Pentecostals, evangelicals, all fall under that. And then the group that has limited or difficult access to goods, jobs, services, and money would be what group? Yes, all others. Right? From Muslims to Sikhs to Buddhists, they oftentimes have limited access to goods, jobs, services, and money based on their religious affiliation. And then the last category we use, and we can use other categories like disabilities, we can use other categories like even beauty. We can talk about that as well. So age, the group that has the greatest access to goods, jobs, services, and money would be 25 to about 45. All right? And then limited access, 0 to 24, let's say 18. 0 to 18, and then 45 plus. So when we look at this fabric of oppression, what is the name of each of these isms? So let's talk about these isms, as they are affectionately called. Infectionate, not affectionate, but yeah. All right, so the ism based on race would be racism. Right? This would be gender bias. Or some people might call it sexism. Gender bias or sexism, which is based on gender. Sexual orientation, heterosexism. Some people use the term homophobia. I don't like to use that because that means I don't have to be fearful of folks not to treat them poorly. So I don't have to be afraid. I'm not necessarily afraid of people. So I like the term heterosexism. And then this is religious bias. And then lastly is something called age. All right. So we'll talk more about these and how we start to create plans to look at these things differently. We'll examine why things have been set up this way and in what ways we can change or influence things to move in the direction of our desires and our plans for our organizations and for our personal lives. All right. So we will be back in just a little while. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about diversity and how we've come to be in the system that we currently find ourselves. So we're going to look at a model. We'll break that model down into some smaller pieces, talk about some examples, and move forward. So here we go. So what typically happens when we talk about diversity issues is that, first of all, our introduction to the world and to the norms and to the rules of culture, for the most part, come from what source in our development? Typically, it is our parents, our family unit, that determines a lot of what those norms are. All right. And so in our early years, what we get from our parents is missing history, bias history, bias history, and we get our parents' paradigms. And those paradigms consist of everything they know, everything they didn't know, and everything they didn't know, they didn't know, those blind spots. So in our early years, our family units give us bias history, missing history. They share their paradigms with us. They give us everything that they knew and they didn't know, and all of that stuff. And then as we grow older, we move through this chart until we get to a place of socialization. And socialization basically is summed up is learning how to act in a society. So learning how to act in society is the process of socialization. So what I start to learn is, even if my parents don't say it, is that I should respond to a certain group of people this way, or I should respond to women in this way, or these things are important to our culture. And these are both explicit and implicit things that I pick up as a young child as I learn how to operate within the world. These people are worthy of honor and praise, and these people are not worthy of honor and praise. Okay? And so I learn how to act and behave in a society based on all the things that I learned as a small child and the paradigm that my parents have passed on to me. Right? And so that stuff so in the family unit, I get all of this information, these paradigms, this bias, this missing history, and then I get taught by society how to act in that society, or I learn how to act in that society. And then the society as a whole starts to reinforce these very same stereotypes of thought patterns. And that's done through the media. The media reinforces that. Government institutions reinforce that, schools reinforce that, and religious institutions encourage that. They reinforce everything that I've been taught thus far. And the whole point of this is to get to this pivotal point of internalization. That not only do I have this information and it's being reinforced by these things, that I now start to believe this information as true. this information becomes true for me because of all of these things. And not only is it true for me, do I internalize it, but in that internalization, I push it forward and I make sure that other folks know what their role is in this system. They also know what my role is in this system. And so I become an agent for the system. And so as we progress through this, we see that once we internalize, we get to a place where we collude with the system. Now, collude is a very interesting word because it means to conspire with something. All right? To conspire. Now, whether you know it or not, when you make a choice or don't make a choice, that is in fact a choice. All we have are choices. All we do is behave. And so when we internalize all of these things, we can then make a choice to, we end up colluding. That's the default mechanism. We end up going along with the system because that's what's always happened. But we do have and once we collude, we move into institutionalization, and then we teach our kids what we've been taught. The system operates the way it's always operated. It benefits the people it's always benefited. Systems perpetuate themselves based on a number of the things that we've discovered as a part of going through this cycle. And so institutionalization is the process of making sure that the institutions keep reinventing and keep selling what has been a part of the cycle for generations. But there is a saving grace, which is that you have the ability to make a choice. And the choice is to create opportunities for freedom. Right? To create opportunities for freedom. Or as I've often said, to free dumb. That dumb is free to go. Ignorance can go goodbye if we make a choice to do that. Otherwise, we continue with the system, the institutionalization continues to happen, and things continually to move the way they've always moved. All right? So let me give you an example of how this cycle works. So what is the popular story of the discovery of America? Right? The popular version is 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's the popular version, right? So let's look at this. What's the missing history or the biased history? The missing history is that it's very difficult to discover something where people already are. My neighbor just got a Porsche, and I'm trying to figure out how I can discover his Porsche. I think I'm going to use the Columbus defense. Not going to fly. Right? So the missing history is that the Vikings were here, that the Native Americans came long before across the Bering Strait. They came to the New World long before Columbus and the Spanish did. That is biased history. The history is biased towards the Spanish and the Italians. Columbus flew under the Spanish flag. He was Italian. So Spain and Italy are conspiring. No, I'm just teasing. Right? But there's biased history. How does that impact how I act or in society? It's extremely important. If I'm told that my people are nothing, and history in my early grade school reinforces that by not having me show up in history books at all, or saying that my contributions to history were minuscule to the world, then that could have an impact on how I get socialized in a society or how I act. And then it gets reinforced through the media. I remember that there used to be after-school specials, Charlie Brown specials that talked about, Columbus discovering America. The government supports that by giving people paid days off and holidays. Religion supports that in that, well, I find it interesting that, and I know these two people are not related, so I do want to say that this is a disclaimer, but I find it interesting that Saint Christopher, who is the patron saint of travelers or lost items, is a saint. And then there is a guy named Christopher Columbus who was lost on his way to India, which is why he referred to the people there as Indians. That the church has this patron saint of lost things. So I find that very interesting. And also, there in schools, oftentimes schools still teach without balance that Christopher Columbus is noted for the discovery of America and of the United States in particular. And so, as we look through this model, we can still see some of those old things still happening. And what happens if I start to believe this? If I believe this as the truth, and I internalize those things? Well, if I'm not a part of the winning team, then I can internalize it a lot differently than I can if I'm a member of the winning team. All right. So if I'm on the losing team, I will internalize this a little bit differently than I will if I'm on the winning team. And then I will collude, I will act as if that is the truth, and it becomes a part of institutions, and that cycle continues. And unless I choose to freedom, all right? And I can break that cycle. So we'll spend a little more time talking about this in just a little bit. Thank you. More about the beliefs and the behaviors. We'll spend some time talking about behaviors in just a bit. So let me go ahead and erase that and we'll talk about beliefs. So first of all, let's talk about a habit. What exactly is a habit? People describe habits by being positive or negative, right? I've heard people talk about biting nails is a bad habit, or smoking is a bad habit, or have a good habit of saving money. So what exactly is a habit? And I'm not talking about the outfit either, all right? What exactly is a habit? I know I'm corny. So a habit is a pattern of learned behavior that has become automatic. It is a learned pattern of behavior. It is a pattern of learned behavior that has become automatic. It is a pattern of learned behavior that has become automatic. Now, the thing that I like about this particular definition is that it concentrates, or it pivots. The central point of this particular definition is the fact that my behaviors are in fact learned. As an educator, as a motivator of people, as a coach and teacher, why is it so important, and why am I so excited about this particular definition of habit? Because at the core of it is the fact that my habits are learned behaviors. Now, there are groups of scientists that talk about how certain behaviors are encoded in our DNA. I have to say, whether that's proven or not proven, I choose not to believe that. I can't believe that. Because what that says to me is that if my habits, if my behaviors are encoded in my DNA, in my genes, in the core central part of myself that I cannot change, then I will not be able to change things that I do not like. I can't change things that don't help me get to my goal. the biological behavior theories say to me that I'm stuck where I am. I can't accept that. I have to believe that there are goals that I want to reach that are beyond what my parents did, or beyond what my family group did, or beyond where I grew up, that I can achieve, that I can work towards, given the hard effort and work that it takes to get there. That I'm not limited by just the blood cells and the DNA that I was given, that I had no choice in. That I'm not limited by that I can go above and beyond what that is. Or I can choose to be content with where I am. But it's a choice that I get to make. Not something that is predisposed because of my genes, my genetic makeup. All right? So habits are important because they are patterns of learned behaviors. I know plenty of smokers, and I don't know of one smoker who came out of his mother's womb with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. How did smokers become smokers? They became smokers by learning the patterns of behaviors that smokers have. All right? Habits. Habits. So how do we build or create habits? I'm sure that lots of folks have done this thing called a New Year's resolution. Right? A New Year's resolution. And typically, how long do New Year's resolutions last? Yeah, about 2 weeks. I think my longest one was a month. But why don't they last? Because we haven't changed some things about ourselves. So we haven't changed our core habits. So I want to tell you a story. At my house, we had this thing called 7 at 7. And when I was 7 years old, at 7 o'clock, the four of us, or three of us at the time, would line up for our daily check-in, or nightly check-in. And so 7 at 7 meant that my mother lined us up so she could make sure that we had brushed our teeth, washed our face, washed behind our ears, and my mother would give us a treat of a big spoon of cod liver oil. Yeah. 7 at 7, night after night, night after night, night after night, night after night. Fast forward 30 years. Before I go to bed, what do? I brush my teeth, I wash my face, I wash behind my ears, and I do not drink a spoonful of cod liver oil. I take caplets. Okay, all right. Why do I currently do that? Because it has become a habit. Why is it a habit? Because first it was a routine. And what is a routine? A routine is a cognitive, scheduled pattern of behavior. Now, why did I toss in that cognitive piece in this definition of routine? That a routine is a cognitive, scheduled pattern of behavior. All right? So there are two types of, we'll talk a lot about human behavior, but there are basically two ways in which your brain kind of functions around behaviors, right? There are the cognitive behaviors, and they are the associative behaviors. All right? The cognitive, and here's an example of cognitive versus associative behaviors, right? So you're driving down the street, you've got the whole soccer team in the car, you're driving down the street, a storm rolls in, and it's pouring down rain. What's the first thing you tell the soccer team to do? Be quiet. That's what you tell them to do. And what else happens in the car? What do you do with other things in the car? You turn the radio down. right? You turn the wipers on. You tell the soccer team to be quiet. Why? Because you need to concentrate and focus on driving. So you're still driving and the storm lets up. You turn up the wipers. What's the first thing you do? You turn up the radio and you tell the soccer team to continue. Or the soccer team knows to continue. Why? Because you've just moved from your cognitive, thinking about your behaviors, to your associative, which is about habits. Now, the funny thing about your associative, your habits, I don't know if it's happened to you, but it's happened to me, that sometimes when I get home, I forgot what happened on the drive home. Have you ever gotten home and you're like, wow, I don't even remember the drive? Because it's become a part of your habits, your associative behaviors. So what will help us establish good habits? Having good cognitive, scheduled patterns of behaviors, routines. Good routines create good habits. Good routines make good habits. All right? So if you want a good routine, you must have good habits. Because after a routine is established, it moves from cognitive to associative, which are your habits. All right? So let's move on down and talk about a little bit about attitude. Attitude. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been told from time to time that I have had a bad attitude. And I don't know if you've been around teenagers, but they seem to have a lot of that. A lot of attitude. Right? So what exactly is an attitude? Now, it's really funny because I remember my parents would say to me, Andre, go to your room till you learn how to act. And I'd be in my room and I'd, be hanging out in there, and then I think I have my act together, and I'd step out into the hallway and I'd say, to be or not to be? Yeah, I spent a lot of time around a room because that's not what they were talking about. But I was very upset because who do they think they are? Sisker and Roper or Ebert or, movie critics? But that's not what they were talking about. Typically, when we talk about attitudes, we talk about attitudes in such amorphous, kind of enigmatic ways that nobody really knows what you're talking about. Because my parents would also say, after they've punished me, boy, fix your attitude, fix your face. And I'm crying or mad or upset, and I'm fixing my face so I can change my attitude. Right? Typically, we talk about attitude as some kind of emotional response to something. And what I'd like to do is give you a new paradigm, a new way of thinking about attitudes. That when I found an attitude, one of the things that I realized when I was 13, I went to New York for the first time. And on the way to New York, we're flying into New York, and the captain, the pilot, gets on the loudspeaker and says, if you look out your left side window, you'll see the Statue of Liberty. So I looked out the window, I didn't see a Statue of Liberty. Bad attitude. So I figure, whatever, I'll just catch it on the way back. And on the way back, the pilot says, if you look out the right side window, you'll see the Statue of Liberty. And I'm sitting there and I look out the window and I can't see the Statue of Liberty because it's on the other side of the plane. I have a bad attitude. All right? So I want to tell you what an attitude is. So in aeronautics, there's some, this is an airplane, by the way. There are some things that pilots should be concerned with. One is knowing how far they are from the ground, which is called what? The altitude. The altitude. How far the pilot is from the ground is referred to as the altitude. There's also another concept that pilots are concerned with, which is called the attitude. And the attitude is the direction to which a plane pivots. That is the attitude. Attitude. When we talk about attitudes, attitudes are determined by the way in which we pivot. I'll give you an example. So my father was my pastor, right? And I love my father. My father loved me. And so it's Friday night. I want to hang out with my friends. I asked my father, I say, Dad, can I take the car? And my dad says yes. And I say my father has what kind of an attitude? A good attitude. And my father says I have what kind of an attitude? He says that I also have a good attitude. So we both have good attitudes. Sunday, now let me tell you a little bit about our church. We went to church because we opened the church, so we were there from like 7:30 a.m. to about 10:30 p.m. and we'd stop for chicken at about noon. Okay, but we were at church all day. And so I asked my father, I said, Dad, a bunch of us want to go to the movies. Can I borrow the car? And what does my father say to my request? He says, no. So I say my father has what kind of an attitude? A bad attitude. Consequently, he says that I have what kind of an attitude? A bad attitude. Why? Because I didn't get what I wanted. All right? So first of all, an attitude has two parts. An attitude is the direction you lean according to your goal. When I lean towards my goal, when I'm getting what I want, I have a good attitude. When I'm leaning away from my goal, I have a bad attitude. So at the core of an attitude, what determines if an attitude is good or bad? Okay, before you answer that, I'll give you a couple more examples. I've known people at work who had bad attitudes about work. Why did they have bad attitudes about work? Because work was keeping them from doing something that they wanted to do. Oh, I could be kicking it, or I'm missing my soap opera, or I could be on vacation in Europe. All of these things, they're upset because they are not reaching their goal. What my parents didn't understand, or maybe they understood but couldn't relate it to me very well, is when they were telling me to change my attitude, what they were actually telling me or requesting of me, or in some cases demanding of me, was that I change my goal. Have you ever had a job that was a weakness for you, that you just couldn't quit? I mean, you really just can't go anywhere. What happens to your attitude? It typically goes down. You have a bad attitude when you're in that situation. I recall being in a situation very similar to that, where I had a job that I couldn't quit. But I had to change my goal because my goal was impacting my attitude, which was impacting my habits and my behaviors and my efficacy and my beliefs. So I had to change my goal. So I switched in my mind from saying that I'm going to this job because I like it, to saying that I'm going to this job because it makes sure that I have a place to eat. It makes sure that I have a place to dwell, a nice car to drive, that I can look halfway decent. So this is why I'm going to my job, not because I like it. I had to change my goal, which impacted my ability to change my attitude. So an attitude is the direction that you lean according to your goal. So if you have a bad attitude, then you might want to check out what your goal is. Typically with young people, they have bad attitudes because they're not reaching their goals. They're not getting what they want. So I, on several occasions, have had to check myself and check in and see, what is it that I want? What is my goal? And then that helps me to change my attitude. All right? So let's move on to this concept of belief, and then finally we'll hit efficacy. So what is a belief? What is a belief? Well, I'll tell you. Thought. Belief. Belief. So what is a belief? A belief is a system of thoughts. It is a system of thoughts that you agree with. All right? And so let's look at a thought. What is a thought? A thought is that conversation that you have with yourself, that mental conversation that you have with yourself, that if you let them stack up enough will become a belief. Here's an example. In the Muslim faith, there are 5 beliefs that make up the foundation of that religious tradition. 5 beliefs. They're called the 5 pillars of Islam, right? For Judaic Christian religions, there are 10 thoughts that make up the foundation of those religions. And that is called the what? Those 10 thoughts are called the 10 commandments. They make up the foundation of an entire belief. And there are millions of people who hold those 2 beliefs, right? Those 2 beliefs. So a system of thoughts that you agree to is a belief. Now, the funny thing is, the 2 parts is, the first is about the thoughts, and the second is that you agree with. Right? I recall a time when my mother, apparently my mother's a smart aleck, much like myself, and I recall that she was on the playground doing her recess duty, and she saw 2 kids fighting, and one of the kids, she said, "Why are you fighting?" And one of the kids said, "He called my mama a name." And my mother said, "What was the name?" And the boy told my mom the name. And then my mom said, "Well, is it true?" And the boy said, "Yes." And so my mother said, "Then why are you fighting?" Beliefs are thoughts that you agree with. I know that you've heard, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Lie. Words always hurt more than sticks and stones. When you agree with someone, you give that power. You give it credence. You give it the ability to take over your life in a sense. When we agree with things, we give it sanction in our own lives. We say it's okay for you to be acceptable into my life. All right? Now, the funny thing about that agreement is that this process of belief allows that agreement to become more solid, because the more I agree with something, the more solid it becomes as a part of my foundation of my belief, which then starts to impact this whole system. All right? So we have to be careful who we agree to and with, what we allow into our lives, what words we allow to have power in our lives. That's extremely important that we be in control of our beliefs. Oftentimes, we don't take control of what people say. We allow people to say things around us that either contradict our beliefs or aren't sustaining for the kind of person we want to be. And so, we'll talk more about this later, but you don't have to cut folks off, but you do have to make a stand for what you believe. All right? And lastly, we're going to talk about self-efficacy. And efficacy is the power the belief in the power you have. All right? And when we talk about power, what is the definition of power? Power is the ability to do work. So efficacy is the power you have, and power is the ability to do work. So efficacy is the ability to do work that you have. Everybody can do something. Martin Luther King said it best. Everyone can be great because everyone can serve. Now, we all might not be able to do the same things, but we can all do something. There is a sense of purpose, there's a sense of power, there is a sense of reason and rightness as to why we're on this planet. We're all here to do something impactful and powerful. And we'll talk about efficacy in just a little while. Thank you so much. All right. So we've talked about our conscious, our subconscious, our creative subconscious. Now we're going to spend some time on how do we start building our subconscious in a way that lines up with our goals, our desires, and in some cases, what we need. All right. So first of all, let's we're going to take a trip back in time to 8th grade science. All right. So in 8th grade science, there was this concept of gravity, and what is gravity, or how is it defined in those science classes? Do you recall? Yep, okay. So gravity was defined as a force that pulls, right? It's a force that pulls. And what are the two pieces of this definition that are important to remember around forces that pull? So bigger objects. So the bigger the object, the stronger the pull. Right? So the bigger the object, the stronger the pull. And what about the second thing? The smaller the object, the weaker the pull. So the larger the object, the larger the pull, the smaller the object, the weaker the pull. So when we look at this particular diagram, so we have two planets in a spaceship. So we have the little planet, we have the big planet, and we have the spaceship. Which of these planets will the spaceship be drawn to, given this rule of gravity? It's a force that pulls, and the two things to remember, that the bigger the object, the stronger the pull, the smaller the object, the weaker the pull. So which of these will our spaceship be drawn towards? That's right, it'll be drawn towards the larger planet. Why? Because it's bigger, right? That's the whole concept of gravity. So if we are, metaphorically, the masters of our universe, and we control what's created in our universe. We get to design what our universe looks like, metaphorically speaking. Can I use this rule of gravity to my advantage? All right, so let's say I want to move this spaceship away from this planet and towards this planet. Can I use the rule of gravity to do that if I'm the creator of this universe? Yeah, I can. I'll show you in just a second. All right. So first of all, when we want to change things in our subconscious, we have to understand this principle of gravity. All right. So first of all, let's call this planet old behavior. All right. And we're going to call this planet new behavior. So explain to me, why is it difficult for people to change using this model? Because their old behavior is so much greater than their new behavior. All right? So if I want to change this using this gravity model, can I change this if I'm the creator of this universe, metaphorically speaking? Yes, I can. The first thing that I must do is that I must make the mass on this side of this new behavior greater than the mass of my old behavior. Now, this is really interesting because I've learned this from car dealers because they're good at this. They are excellent at this. What happens when what's one of the things that car dealers want you to do before you leave their lot? So you show up on their lot, you look at a couple of cars, you kick the tires, you close the doors and that kind of stuff. What's one of the first things that they want you to do? They want you to take the car for a test drive. Why? Well, let's examine what a new car is like. So a new car, you sit in a new car, and what does it feel like as you sit there? For the most part, it's pretty comfortable. What does it look like when you're inside? Things are sparkly, shiny, new. Right? You turn on the radio and it sounds crisp and clear. All the wipers and all those things work. They even have a special fragrance that they use for these cars called the new car smell. Right? So you have all of these things and you test drive it and it's smooth and it's nice and it's fabulous. And then you bring it back to the lot and you get out and you get back into your car with the French fries and the smashed Cheerios in the back seat and the papers and all of that stuff. How do you feel about your car? Not very good, right? Because the dealers have done such a good job of building this new behavior for you, making this so much greater than your old behavior. So, to change this gravitational pull, you must change your habits, your attitudes, your beliefs, your efficacy. And what starts to happen once you start rebuilding these things? Does this old behavior still have the same kind of pull that it had before? No, it doesn't. Right? Because you've shifted the gravitational pull towards these new things. You've made these bigger and better than what they were prior to that. All right? So, Andre, you've given us a lot of theoretical underpinnings. Let's get down to brass tacks. All right? So, let's talk about how we start changing these things and building these things up. So, I'm going to erase this. And we'll just make this planet new behavior. Okay, so It's all Planet New behavior. So let's talk a little bit about how humans communicate with one another. All right. So how is it that humans communicate? How do we talk to each other, communicate? When I was a kid, and maybe still now, I like these characters called the X-Men. I like these characters called the X-Men. And the reason I like the X-Men, primarily because there was this one cool dude. He was a guy who was in a wheelchair, but he had mind control powers. He could move stuff, talk to people, all sorts of stuff. Didn't even have to move his wheelchair, right? And I always wanted those powers. And then one day I realized that we have those powers and we use them every day. Now I know some of you are like, what are you talking about, Andre? Well, I'll show you. So how do humans communicate? We communicate through pictures, right? And I'll give you an example. I've been in the grocery store, and there, where I live, we have multicultural grocery stores and communities all over the place, and oftentimes I'm in the grocery store and I'll hear someone speaking a language that I'm familiar with the language, but I don't know what they're saying, so I don't know what they're saying, and then all of a sudden they will say a word that I know, and I'm chimed in, right? I'm not trying to be nosy, but they did say something that was familiar to me, and so all the other time they're speaking these words, but I don't have a picture for those words. And when they say a word that I have a picture for, then I'm chimed in, I'm bought in, I'm understanding what they're talking about, or I have a desire to understand what they're talking about. All right? So humans communicate through pictures. All right? So here's another example. If you close your eyes and I said the word apple, what comes up for you? Some people would say red, some would say Steve Jobs, other people would say a tree, so forth and so on. And you get those images because we communicate through pictures. Now, how do I get my pictures to you? I create these things called words. So the words that I use give you specific and particular pictures. For example, I just said apple and you gave me examples of apples. Had I said rotten apple, you would have got a different picture in your mind based on the words that I used. All right? So the words that we use are important to get the kind of pictures that we want. And our pictures determine or impact our emotions. All right? So the words that we use impact the pictures that we hold or the images that we hold of ourselves or of other people, and those impact our emotions. Have you heard anyone ever say a picture is worth 1,000 words? Right? Yeah. So you can see more things in terms of emotions and feelings and settings, and all of these things can be demonstrated in a picture so much more effectively than they can be with words. All right? And those pictures stimulate our emotions. And our emotions are the fuel we have to do things. All right? It's at the core of our motivation to do things are these things called emotions. And our emotions impact our behavior. All right? How we act. How we act. So words, pictures, emotions impact our behaviors. It's very interesting to me that I've watched those late night programs like Feed the Hungry Children and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things I think is really interesting is that they show these kids in these really horrible situations. And some of them have flies on their heads, and they're crawling out of, just horrible situations, and they're asking people to help them. Well, they show those particular pictures because they want you to have a particular emotion of what? For some folks, it's guilt. For others, it's responsibility. But they want a particular kind of emotion because they want some specific behaviors from folks. And what are those behaviors that they want from those shows? They want people to donate money or donate time or even some resources to their cause. And so the word, picture, emotions, and behavior model really can serve us well once we understand that that's what happens with marketing. That's what happens in our relationships, that oftentimes people have different pictures, and so they have different emotions, which is indicated by their different behaviors. But we can use this to help build our habits, our attitudes, and our beliefs, and our efficacy in the direction of our goals. So we're going to talk about this model. You get your paradigms. Where do paradigms come from? They come from your parents, your family, and the people that you value, right? They give you their paradigm. Your parents gave you what they knew. They gave you what they knew they didn't know, and they also gave you what they didn't know they didn't know. That was their gift to you. That was their gift to you. Now, what's the problem with this gift? The problem with the gift is most of the gift is missing. Now, your parents did the best they could with what they had to raise you. Maybe like you've looked for that book, How to Destroy Andre's Life in 18 Short Years, and let me tell you, folks, I was not able to find that book. They didn't plan to make the mistakes they planned. They tried to do the best they could, and I got to tell you, they did a pretty good job. But they tried to do the best they could with what they had, so they gave me their paradigm. And where do you think your parents got their paradigm? From their parents. And their parents got their paradigm from their parents. And so for generations, there are things that we've learned to know and know not to know, and things that we don't know that keep getting passed along. All right? And so all of that stuff ends up getting written into our conscious mind, which gets funneled into our subconscious. All right. I want to talk a little bit about these blind spots. Now, what is the problem or the difficulty with having a blind spot? Well, first of all, let's back up. Why is a blind spot dangerous? How many people have driven cars or ridden in a car? Yeah. And typically, blind spots are located where? They're typically behind, sometimes in front, underneath, on top of, and if you drive a Hummer, the whole thing is a blind spot, right? But what makes those blind spots so dangerous? First of all, did you put those blind spots there on your car? No, you didn't put them there. So it's not your fault that you have blind spots. It's not your fault that your car has blind spots. But it is, however, your what? Responsibility. Blind spots become dangerous when A, we don't know where they are, and B, when we don't take responsibility for them. I drive a Saturn Vue, and let me tell you, when I go to the rental car place and they give me a different car, my blind spots are not the same, but I'm still responsible for those blind spots. I'm still responsible for that car. I didn't make the blind spots. It's not my fault. I just stepped into a situation where these blind spots existed, but I have to take responsibility for those blind spots that I didn't even create. All right? So blind spots become dangerous when we don't know where they are and we don't take responsibility for them. Sometimes people refer to blind spots as racism. And racism is only a problem when people haven't taken responsibility for something they didn't create. or when they try to ignore them or don't want to acknowledge where those blind spots are for them. So blind spots can be dangerous when we don't know where they are and when we don't take responsibility for them. So in my rental car, how do I know or find out where my blind spots are? Now this is tricky, but I have to look for something that I don't know is there. I have to look for blind spots. I have to go out and I have to investigate. I have to adjust my mirrors. I have to move the seat so that I can be familiar with the blind spots of that rental vehicle, just as I'm familiar with the blind spots in my own car. So blind spots are not our fault, but they are our responsibility. All of these things, what we know, we don't know, the paradigms that our parents gave us, we internalize that and that comes into our mind. All right? And so now we'll talk about how that gets funneled into our subconscious. Thank you so much. I'll be back in just a second. Improve around your goals. And so what, I guess at the core of this presentation, the core question is going to be, what are your goals? And so these tools will help lead you towards your goals and help you to accomplish those. So it's a little disclaimer. If you don't have any goals, I'm not sure that these tips or tools that we're going to give you will be very helpful. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk a lot about the mind. The workshops on the brain that's a totally different subject, but we're going to talk about the mind and how the mind works and how you can use the tricks that evolution or creation has given us in how we operate and how we use our mind. So we're going to figure out what the mind is, first of all, how we use the mind, and then how we can change the way we use our mind in the direction of our goals. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. First, we're going to talk a little bit about this thing called the conscious mind. And when you think of the conscious mind, what words come up for you? Okay, yeah. Typically when I do this presentation, some very specific words come up for folks. And the first is, and the three words that typically come up is that conscious means to be alive, awake, and aware. That's what it means to be conscious. As a small kid, we used to watch boxing. I think it was like Friday Night Fights or something, and we'd see Muhammad Ali and George Foreman and all of these legendary boxers. And one of the things that the referee would do to make sure that they could continue fighting would be to measure their consciousness, right? And so he'd make sure that they were alive, that they were breathing. He'd also make sure that they were aware and awake, that they were conscious of what's going on. And so what he would say is, how many fingers do I have up? Who's the president of the United States? To try and gauge their awake and awareness, all right? So that's what a conscious mind does. It is alive, awake, and aware. And our conscious mind also takes in information from these three facets. And the information that it takes in, information comes through our five senses, right? So we take in information into our mind from our five senses. So we have the ability to see, the ability to hear, the ability to taste, the ability to smell, and the ability to touch. And all of that stuff creates information that goes into our conscious mind. All right? So we're consciously aware of all the things around us using those five senses. We listen for twigs breaking when we're out in the park. We listen for screeches when we're in the city of tires. We notice the lights, we notice traffic, we look for danger, we look for safety. All of those things we do with our conscious mind. All right? So our conscious mind takes in all of this information. Now, what does our conscious mind do once it has acquired all that information? Because it can't all sit in our conscious mind. Well, what happens is lots of this information, all the information that's important to us, goes into what we call our subconscious. All right? So we've already looked at conscious as being alive, awake, and aware. So now let's look at the first part of this part of our mind, sub. What does sub mean? And there are sandwich shops that have used this as a part of their name. There are cartoon characters that use this as a part of their name. Namely, for me, Saint Namor, love the Submariner, right? Sub. So what does sub mean? There's subtract. There's subtract. There's submarine. What does sub mean? Sub means under, right? In the case of subtract, it means to take away from one part and place it under something else. So submarine means under. So when we say subconscious, what we're talking about is the consciousness that's under what we're aware of. All right? So it is also alive, awake, and aware. It's also gathering information, but it's not something that we're readily or consciously aware of. So it is our subconscious. And the subconscious really does some interesting things. One of the things is that it stores this information. So all the information that we've got in our conscious mind gets stored or gets written into our subconscious, right? The conscious that we're not readily aware of. And our subconscious puts those into some specific categories, all right? And so one of the categories that it stores this information in is called a habit. So that's one of the categories. Another category is called your attitude. Still another is called your behavior. And lastly is your efficacy. Now, we'll take some time and we'll go through the rest of this model. I just want to show you, give you a cursory view of the whole model, but we'll go in depth and really start to look at these pieces individually. All right? So we have our conscious mind, which means to be alive, awake, and aware. We have our subconscious that stores information, and it stores it in these categories: our habits, our attitudes, our beliefs, and our efficacy. And then lastly, we have our creative subconscious. Now, we've talked about subconscious. It's the conscious that's under. All right? So let's look at this creative. When we talk about creative, what is creation? What does it mean that something is a creation? It means that it is made. And what is it made from? In this particular case, our creative subconscious is using our subconscious to create things. All right? So a master sculptor might use a number of things to make statues, right? So he may take clay and make statues. He may be an excellent glass blower, and he uses glass to create his artwork. Where our mind uses our subconscious to create the life that we want, need, and deserve. All right? That we think we need and deserve, or that we think we want. So our creative subconscious has three primary jobs. It executes its job in three primary ways. One is that it maintains sanity. It solves problems. And it creates drive or energy. All right? It creates drive or energy. So our conscious means to be alive, awake, and aware. It takes in information from our five senses. The subconscious stores or records that information in these particular categories of our habits, our attitudes, our behaviors, and our efficacy. And then our creative subconscious just says yes to our subconscious in these three ways. It makes sure that we have sanity, it helps us solve problems, and it creates drive and energy. All right? So right now we're going to take a short break to talk about some of the ways that we can see this impacting our lives. So we'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Thanks.